Zig on the top. Today on the show, we have Kelly Foley. Kelly Foley is a singer-songwriter, musician, artist, and multi-mediums, a creative extraordinaire. Kelly is a staple of the Stockton scene who plays in a plethora of projects, Broken Toys being one of them. Broken Toys in the near future coming out with a new record. But Kelly joins us on the podcast today to talk about Louder Than You Think, a documentary about Gary Young, the original drummer to Pavement. Kelly was a near and dear friend to Gary, and he's actually the guy who recommended Stephen and the other cats from Pavement to go record with Gary when they made the first Pavement record. The documentary, Louder Than You Think, has a companion soundtrack, also called Louder Than You Think, the lo-fi history of Gary Young and Pavement, which Kelly was involved in putting together. The soundtrack is put out by Independent Project Records. It's on all the streaming platforms, and if you go to Independent Project Records, you can get a sick vinyl. This conversation was awesome. Kelly is full of energy and is one of those guys you can just bring up one thing with and dive into a deep conversation. We started off talking about the Cleveland music scene and Perubu and Devo and Peter Loeffner and some deep Cleveland cuts and jumped right into it. So not only did I get to have a really enlightened conversation about the Stockton scene, but also I got to have a conversation about my own scene, and I made a new friend. So before we get to this conversation, if you hear anything you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Kelly and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Kelly Foley. But not too many. That you so do him personally.
So do you follow, I assume you do, all the way up to Rocket of the Tombs? And,
oh, yeah, dude. Yes, very much so.
We come from that, too. We were at the same time. I was... when I was a little boy, I was a Cream magazine guy, and when everybody else was Rolling Stone and Stockton, it was kind of hard to find. But so of course I was, Lester Bangs, and I was before the Ramones and all that kind of stuff. I was bred on being that kind of thing, and so I would read about Rocket of the Tombs and early Perubu and all of that kind of stuff. And Gary Young and I were in a band during the punk rock time, 79 to 80, that was called Krell, which is on that, one of those songs is on that album. And we modeled ourselves on Perubu to be, because everybody else was really militant about being kind of like the Clash and the Fourth Thing, and we were dudes that dressed in, kind of thrift store suits and sang, what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, for sure. But
Dave Thomas and all that, yeah.
So let's kind of jump into the...
Let's start? Yeah.
Yeah, let's jump into it there. Let's jump in with Perubu, man. So what Perubu did you get ultimately? Was it the single? Was it the album?
The very first single was, which was... Gosh, what would it have been? It was like a Final Solution, yeah?
Yep.
Or was it 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, right?
I think one's A, one's B.
Yeah.
But Final Solution was definitely one of the first. It was definitely the first single. I can't remember if it was A side or B side, but yeah. That's awesome, man.
So this would have been 78 for us in California, and so the thing I always try to clarify is before things were called prog, right? And sort of like punk. What we had was a thing called Tower Records, and it came out of Sacramento, right? Tower Records started in Sacramento. So we were just 30 minutes away from in Stockton. So we had one of the first Tower Records outside of LA and all that kind of stuff. So that started in 74. And they had this section that was called imports. So before there was like a progressive rock section or a punk section or any of those kind of things, or electronica or classical avant-garde, it was just called Tower Records import section. So that's where my whole thing started, that I would read Cream magazine and then run to the store and try to find that. So so Perubu, that first single, and then a little bit after that, The Modern Dance, which so that was about, for me, I got that in 77, 78. And so that was really a huge influence on me, that beautiful record.
Yeah, it's an incredible, it's one that you can always go back to. That one's endless.
Yeah. And then The Art of Walking, and, just all the way down. Yeah, right.
Very cool. So, did you? I think I might be mixing this up, but did you work at a record store at one point
Yeah,
too?
I worked at Tower Records.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. So
But
when you
before that, when I was a kid, 74, my friend Jeff Clark and I, Jeff will pop up a lot in this conversation. We were when everybody was into sort of Grand Funk in Chicago. Just for reference, I'm not trying to make
right,
fun of them.
right?
What
No,
was
that's just
happening,
that's the mainstream. That's the
right? And it
balance.
moved into Foreigner and Boston, all that kind of stuff. We were the kids that were on the outside, and so by the time that Neil Young had made like Tonight's the Night or something, that's about which would be what 75 or whatever. Uh, Jeff and I connected on that, but I was into like he and I both found that we were into these what would be called like comedy stuff, Firesign Theater, if you're familiar,
Okay.
and Bonzo Dog Band, yeah, the
Okay.
Bonzo Dog Band, so we had
That
those
sounds
kind of.
awesome.
Oh, it was great, and so we were the weirdo teenagers that would show up at the little pool parties that people have while they're putting on Elton John, and we're like, "Would you like to hear Raw Power?" And they're like, "Yeah." So anyway, and so Jeff was like coming from the kind of Birds and Country Joe McDonald and like the San Francisco psychedelic scene, and I was like the New York Dolls, the Cream magazine. So I was New York Dolls and Mott the Hoople and Iggy and the Stooges, and so we met together and sort of swapped back and forth a lot of that kind of stuff. And yeah, and then so that was like in 74 to 7 through, and then up to 77 is when I got a job in a place called Record Factory for a little bit, and then I went over to Tower Records, and I became the person that ran like the sort of jazz and classical thing. And so that put me into finding out, about Edgar Varese and Richard Pinhas and Terry Riley and all those, kind of things. And yeah.
That's incredible. Well, it's interesting. Like, did you have going into like the classical and jazz section prior to like to getting that gig? And did you have like a fondness for classical and jazz, or did it develop because of the gig?
My father was, who was born in 1917. Um, lived through that whole era. He went to he was on a basketball scholarship, and so he was down in Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, and so he saw all of that pre-bebop, like Duke Ellington and Count Basie, and so jazz was a big mainstay in our house that I grew up in. But the thing about it was, and a lot of vocal jazz, like 6-part harmonies, Andrews Sisters, all that kind of stuff was just kind of, I wasn't like reading the liner notes to any of those records, but it was just constantly flowing. But I also had 3 older sisters that were born, like I was born in 59, and I had sisters that were born like in 51 through 54. So when I was 7, I just walk into the music room that we had, and there was the Doors and the Yardbirds and the Small Faces and Donovan there, and I would just pick it up and put it on. And so I was just, learning by myself. So by the time when I was 14 and I met Jeff, who was older than me, he was 17. I had a pretty good working knowledge of stuff that we both grew up with because I was so into the Kinks and Beatles and Stones and all that stuff from a really young age. But when it came to classical music, the other thing that my father and mother were really into were film. So we would go to a lot of films that were kind of inappropriate for a young child like me and my younger sister to go to. Like we saw Bonnie and Clyde and the years that it came out, which pretty hard hitting, but very valuable for my knowledge. And so I would say that by the time that uh, I had a lot of soundtrack knowledge, movies that were adult, not porn movies, but adult movies that had soundtracks that were, John Barry and all of this kind of stuff. And I was really into Clockwork Orange, and yeah, I guess that would be like a starting point for it, right? Like Wendy Carlos would be a big starting point for that kind of stuff. Um, the Clockwork Orange soundtrack, and with all the Beethoven electronic and all of that. And so I would say that twin tier of the switched on Bach classical stuff that had been done, and then how it came through with Clockwork Orange. It got me into Beethoven, and then through that, Kubrick was a big help in that, because a few years after that would be, well, of course, in '68 there was, 2001, and then Clockwork Orange was in '71, and then '75 was Barry Lyndon. So that, a lot of really beautiful classical music was just seeping inside of me, just from his films.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Like, I think a lot of like classical music for a lot of people, just listeners, it becomes kind of common language through film. They just know these classical pieces, you know what I mean? Like, and I think we're all the same way. And part of how we know, like maybe, like through Looney Tunes or films, all these classical pieces like seep into our minds without with different avenues. So it would make a ton of sense for you that film would be the means by, where you develop that language.
I would say that, yes, even more cartoon. That's very true. Cartoons, because at the time, Looney Tunes, and also like say, you can't really find these anymore, but like say Mr. Magoo, of all weird people, had this like 4-part series that he did, that he adapted classical novels. So it was like Moby Dick and 3 others, which I can't remember, but it was all filled with this beautiful music. And then all of those composers that went into television. I was just talking with my friend Jackson Griffith about this. All of those composers that went into television, like Vic Mizzy and all of these guys, you could tell, and in film too, Bernard Herrmann and everything, you could hear the classical influence. And then, of course, by the time you get into Morricone and Fellini and all, some very, it turned into a lot of next wave people that were influenced by Italian composers that were, very rare to me. And then that went into Bowie, who would be like, say like Life on Mars was based on these small Italian, I don't know what they're called, just small, short songs.
Right.
I forget what they're called.
Vignette, arias.
Arias. That was, that kind of stuff. And you would see that a lot. Those British songwriters, Scott Walker and all of that, they would be given this publishing stuff that were these Italian things, and then they would just change the words and do the music, and you end up with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So because Bowie is now a big part of what you do. Like, as far as like, I guess kind of let's step back and like,
Sure.
with your musical journey as far as expressing music. When did that start? What initially did you start playing? And like was it through this adventure like of listening to records and just, like being exposed that way and wanting to make it?
Well, for me personally, what it was is I come from Bakersfield, California. And of course, Bakersfield, Merle Haggard and Buck Owens and the Bakersfield country sound, right? My uncle is Bill Woods, and he's called the father of the Bakersfield sound. So my family came from Texas and migrated to Bakersfield, and my uncle worked in the like bean fields and stuff in Bakersfield, and he was fluent in Spanish because my grandparents had lived in Mexico, and so he fused that sort of country sound and like the Norteña music thing, and then that became the Bakersfield sound. And then there was a thing that was called the Blackboard Cafe, and so he discovered Merle Haggard and he discovered Buck Owens. He gave all those guys their start, and then he later went on to become an executive at Capitol Records. So when I was born into the royalty of the Bakersfield sound. but at the same time, my first real thing that caught my ear was the first Beatles record. So I sort of, and then we moved up to Stockton up north. And so I was kind of the prince in exile. I would, and I stayed in Bakersfield. You'd be talking to a guy, hey, you want to hear my new country album? But it's like, just, I didn't become that guy. But I have a lot of respect for it, obviously. And this man was a great man. Bill was a great man. And so, and as I said, my father was a jazz guy, and my mother, her boyfriend was Buck Owens. And so there was a lot of music coming at me from a lot of different ways. And so by the time that I started doing music, all of that stuff was filtering into me, but I started at the Beatles, of course. I tried to learn some Beatles songs. And then the thing I can always remember is that the very first song that I ever learned on guitar was The Wizard by T-Rex. Second, yeah, great song. And the second song I ever learned was The Needle in the Damage Done by Neil Young. And then the third song was Julia by the Beatles. So that kind of sums me up in a way. My early thing, those were things that I really learned on. And but at the same time I was doing it, I was deep. It was like, I was a little too young to be right into the glam movement, but that was my favorite thing. So I was, all about what would have been considered glam at that time, but now they don't call it that much. But it was coming at me through magazines and stuff and music. So it was Raw Power by Iggy and the Stooges, Ziggy Stardust, T-Rex, the Slider, all of that kind of stuff. And I was pretty alone. None of my friends were, they didn't want to hear that. The closest they would get to that would be The Who or something, And so I was pretty alone. But by the time I met Jeff, he came over to my house and he was looking through my records collection, and he pulled out like the first New York Dolls, and he goes, wow, I've always wanted to hear this. And I was going, I love you. Yeah.
That's awesome. So like, when you're picking, it's really interesting too, that like looking back, you're like, those three songs really do sum me up. I think in a weird way, when we first start like playing, what I mean, there's these key things we're trying to like figure out. And it's funny how like that slowly simmers, and years later, after you've kind of got it in your hands and in your mind and in your soul, what I mean? Like when you have those like tunes, like, and understand them in a way, those like handful of like key things you started with are like still prominent and potent into like who you are. It's really interesting too when you look back and like analyze that. You're like, dang, what I mean? Like I really did take a lot, because I think back like when I first started playing some of the first tunes.
What do you play?
I sing and play guitar.
Nice.
I play in a band here in Cleveland called Sea Level, and we're like a funk punk reggae rock group. It takes acoustic open tune guitars and runs them through Marshall amplifiers. But like that, and thinking about that, I was like, man, I was really into like the Blues Brothers when I was a kid, like, and all those like blues licks and that phrasing and stuff like that. And like,
when you saw the Blues Brothers, did you put together that these were songs that had come before, like Rubber Biscuit, and all? Did you make that connection?
Yeah, later. I was like,
later,
whoa.
not right at the time.
Yeah, not when I was younger. I was just like, oh, this is cool. These guys wrote a lot of good songs. And then like, what I mean? And then you learn like, wait, Soul Man, Sam and Dave, like this, like these guys were just a cover band. But like, it's in a way, I had kind of like I appreciate some groups like that now, and maybe it comes from liking the Blues Brothers as a kid, but like a band like Sublime or something, like they were just kind of a cover band too, man. They just did nothing but other people's stuff in their stuff, and like, but that also like led me down rabbit holes where I was like, whoa, Toots and the Maytals, what I mean, like, which is way more exciting.
Yeah. That's that's so funny about that, because again, when I started working in the record store, like Linda Ronstadt would have these records and these songs, and I'd hear this, and then when I worked in the record store, I'd go, this song's by Warren Zevon. This song's by Toots and the Maytals. This song's by the Everly Brothers, which I knew about the Everly Brothers, but that kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, she had good taste. And then later on, it would go with like a Judy Collins, say, she's like, wow, she's doing Leonard Cohen and she's doing, Bertolt Brecht and all of this. It was very interesting, which leads in today to a sort of thing about, I don't know if you run into this a lot, but the sort of, when musicians are playing, they have a high emphasis on wanting to do all original music and stuff. And in my mind, I was going, yeah, but it'd be good to know other songs too,
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't really try to preach that a lot, but I sort of work two poles. When I play by myself, say on acoustic guitar, I'll do everything from Bertolt Brecht all the way up through, the Pixies and everything in between, the Carpenters and, Leonard Bernstein or something, just anything, not Leonard Bernstein, sorry, like Bernard Herrmann or something. Leonard Bernstein, sorry, Lenny. He wrote stuff. Well, wait, didn't he write Something's Coming from? Yeah, Leonard Bernstein, Something's Coming, West Side Story. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I do that one.
You got it. Check one on the list. Well, when you do like those solo dolo gigs, which as any musician does, you eventually have to take on some of those. It's a completely different thing, but and you kind of you got to hit everything because you never know what anyone likes, but also to take it back, I think there's this whole thing too where there's a lot of bands that don't really admit to their influences in a way. It's like, I wear this band shirt, but we don't, yeah, it's cool, but it's not, it's not what we do. We do us, you know what I mean? Come on, man. You know what I mean?
What do you think it is? Is that psychological, or is it?
I think it might be a psych thing. I think it might be I don't know, because the first time I really noticed it, I played my band at the time was opening for this, God, what were they called? Greta Van Fleet. They played a small,
oh my God.
Right now they're huge. They're huge.
Yeah.
Back
Are
it
they
was
from?
No, they're from Michigan.
Oh, okay.
But they're playing at the Grog Shop in Cleveland, which is it's like a 400 person room. If you oil enough people and get them through the door, you can probably do 400. You know what I mean? But this is right when they started. So, and I had no clue who we were playing with. I just showed up. You know what I mean? Because this band, I was just playing bass in. And I was talking to the it was like, oh, these are all young cats and they sound just like Zeppelin. And I was asking about influences and stuff, and they did everything they could to not say Led Zeppelin. They're like, yeah, Charlie Parker. I'm like, I love Parker too, man, but I don't hear it. I didn't say that. You know what I mean? But I was just kind of baffled that they wouldn't say that. But I get it. They probably just get told their whole life that, their whole musical career at that point. They're like, you are Led Zeppelin. And they're like,
but when you listen to their record,
I know
they don't do Led Zeppelin. They just come from probably the way it was with I don't know, the way Badfinger sounded like the Beatles or something, but they had their own stuff,
Did the Beatles write some songs that Badfinger did? Yeah.
Come and Get It.
Yeah.
If you want it here. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, dude. But yeah, so I think it is a psychological thing where it's we're cool, more cooler than the influences, you know what I mean? And or maybe it's a kind of another a fixation on the person. Because I feel there's the whole oh, who are you guys? You know what I mean? Question that everyone's I don't want to talk about. I just am me, So I don't know what it is. But I definitely do think it's a thing. And I don't think there's any shame in hey, I liked whatever. So, I play their songs sometimes. The Ramones are cool. I never think they're not cool. Come on.
When we first met Gary, he joined this band of my friends that were Theron Knight was his name, and Brian Thalco. and they had a band called The Fall of Christianity, and Gary joined their band. And I knew Theron, by this time he was about 18, but I knew him since he was like 11 years old. So I saw him, you know, getting off on Toys in the Attic and Aerosmith and that kind of stuff, you know. And by the time that they were doing their songs, and they're, you know, like punk rock was really on, so they kind of, you know, it's kind of a year zero thing. You had to shed all your influences, but you could hear that stuff in there, you know, and I always thought it was really cool. And but they kind of also would sound like the Talking Heads and the Clash and all of that kind of stuff. But it was there was a lot of denial of we're not trying to sound like that, but uh, anyway, it's that's the story. That happens all the time, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and I get it. I think maybe okay, maybe it's the thing like you grew up in a small town and you go to the city and you're trying to be that new person in the city. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, absolutely.
but ultimately your environment kind of sculpts who you are and like how you think and feel and what that. At least it is not completely, but you know, it has some type of effect on how you get into different things, I think. So like if if you're open to like learning more about jazz and avant-garde music because you grew up around, all these amazing like influences and outlets, you're going to be more open to that compared to someone who didn't. Yeah. So I definitely think maybe that's the thing. It's um yeah, I think it's just like it does ultimately affect, and maybe it's that person moving on or doing the
That was
Bob Dylan thing where they're like, make up my history.
right. Well, that was the interesting thing again about Gary is that um, he he had lived a whole life before he ever moved into the neighborhood where we were, and then these kids that were almost 10 years younger than him hired him to be the drummer, and he had already seen the Who at the Fillmore. He was there the night it burned down. I mean, and he was into the Vanilla Fudge and all this different kind of stuff. But his punk rock drumming, as it would have been called, kind of came from, Carmen Appice, who was in the Vanilla Fudge, and Keith Moon, and he, his next door neighbor was when he was growing up was Andy Newmark, who played with Sly and the Family Stone, and he played with Bowie too. Yeah, and so Gary had been around, but he was just, all right, you kids, whatever you want to do, and he was just super hard hitting, drummer that was very demonstrative. And this is before he's in Pavement, and so he really brought a lot to their sound. And those kids that were in Pavement were in little bands that were at that same time too. And we would all kind of migrate to Sacramento and open up, the Meat Puppets and the Dead Milkmen, all that kind of stuff, and Butthole Surfers, all that kind of stuff, Circle Jerks.
Yeah.
This is becoming a real R-rated, just doing band names.
Yeah.
It's like you're complete. But that's what was happening at the time,
Yeah. Well, so okay, so kind of back it up. So, so you met Gary when he was playing in the Fallen Christianity, which I think, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Or before.
They were like, let me just back it up a little bit. My friend Jeff and I, during the time in the mid 70s, you would have maybe heard about this, so you wouldn't have lived it, but in the mid 70s, a lot of stuff got really bloated. 3 record sets by Yes, and just stuff to where you just couldn't hear it anymore. It was just like music was really getting real flabby. And so Jeff and I, at my friend Randy Covey's house, took out. I was an artist, and Jeff was too, and we just took out hundreds of pieces of binder paper and a bunch of felt pens and invented this whole world that was called dope and roll. And what we did was just made up our own bands and drew them and just drew the album covers. Then you flip it over and it had all the names of the songs. And we ended up having about 200 of them. And we would invite all of our friends over that were real arty friends, and they would vote on, like have these little polls, the top 10 for da da da. And so, and that became really popular among our friends. During that time, Theron, who was a young guy, came up to us and said, I want to have my own band and I want to be called Caesar Cash. And my band is called the Fall of Christianity. And Kelly, will you draw it? And Jeff, will you help me figure out what the songs are? So we did, and we made this whole first album. And some of the songs that we made up on that, actually, a couple of years later, when punk rock hit, it was just ready to go. Like I'm going to kill you because I don't like your looks was the name of one of the songs. Yeah. And that became kind of a big hit for them, and, but it was just like a little cartoon thing that we did. They call it world building now, but back then it wasn't called that, but we were doing that, and we were sitting on it, and Jeff and I were just this industrious little art thing that was trying to get past, April Wine and these bands that were coming out, just putting that aside and having our own world, And then when punk rock hit, we were ready to go. And so now jump ahead to, and then in between that also, I'm sorry, Jeff and I also started this band called The Mixers, and that band, and again, just right before punk rock. So we took that Psych album that was called Nuggets. Yeah, if you're familiar with Nuggets,
a pin in the Nuggets. I just met Lenny Kay here at the Rock Hall. He did one of the Nugget shows, and with all these older Cleveland cats, and it was just incredible. But anyway, so we
were
the Nuggets.
But we were like, so that record came out, and we were like, and we had kind of grown up with garage a little bit because of my older sister, and he had too. We were from California, so we knew about Psychotic Reaction by the Count Five and all this kind of stuff. And so, with the help of our other friend, whose name was Jackson Griffith, his name was Brian Griffith at the time. He was just like this Brando figure on the Stockton scene that just was amazing. Guy, just brilliant, totally literate person that was into Charlie Parker for real, and all this kind of stuff. And so we kind of were the first so-called punk rock band that was in Stockton, and we were able to have a bunch of these kind of young kids that were changing from being what was, mainstream, and they caught on to us. So we'd be playing Stepping Stone by the Monkees, and it's just all down the line, And so we kind of carved out our own little niche there in Stockton. And then out of that came this band called The Authorities, which you should really check out. It was really great. And then I'm not saying they came out of our band, but they just sort of were attached to our scene, and they would open for The Mixers, and then the Fall of Christianity, all this. So now we're up to that. And so then Gary came on the scene and joined with the Fall of Christianity, and then they would practice in the little garage thing that they had there and do all original songs. They did a couple of cover songs. I can't really remember what they were, but and when the Sex Pistols was hitting really hard, even though they had already broke up by this time, but that power was lingering, And also the other thing that was really important to me was that sort of all that stuff was coming out of the Midwest, the Dead Boys and all that kind of stuff. And then of course we had, the post New York Doll stuff like the Heartbreakers and Richard Hell and, Voidoids, all of that beautiful stuff, Patti Smith, Television. We were all about that. And so it was building, and also Elvis Costello and the Clash. And it's weird to say Elvis Costello, but people don't remember that he was punk when he came out. So was Tom Petty. People don't remember that either, but it was just called that. And so we were that, and it was really, really a fun time. And then so that kind of little second wave that came out of it was the Fall of Christianity and the Authorities and a couple of other little bands that were that like Steve Malkmus was in, and stuff like the Straw Dogs and these kind of things. And so then you just go right to the edge about in the 80s, about 81 or 82, and the Dead Kennedys hit, and that was a local thing too. That was in San Francisco, and so we were glommed onto that scene too. And then that sort of became that way more like, mosh pit, hardcore kind of stuff, more, and that's there you go. There's that's a little history of how we tied into it. Although I will say that Jeff ended up going to Berkeley right at the time, like in 77, I guess, maybe 78. And so that was right at the time when the San Francisco punk scene was happening. And at that time, people don't really talk about this a lot, but that was run by artists. These were art students and stuff that were having bands that just had really great little singles and stuff, and they would design their own. It was an art movement, you know. And in England, it was a different thing because it was based on the garbage strikes, and we didn't have these problems in America. So our thing was, you know, that
yeah. Well, that's I never really thought of it like that. Yeah, because like in that sense, it would make sense that it's like more of an avant-garde appreciation of the stepping outside the norm and kind of like the minimalist approach to like de-icing the cake of stuff, and then when in England, I guess with the garbage strikes and like just like the kind of like politicized kind of approach to like what it could do. It's kind of like a twofer that formed into like what it became later. That's interesting. That's right. Yeah, man.
Yeah,
I guess I never
because Richard Hell, Malcolm McLaren came to New York and saw the Heartbreakers. Not the Heartbreakers. I'm sorry, Television. And Richard Hell was the one that kind of tore the T-shirts and did all the art stuff, and then he went back, kind of introduced it to the fashion scene in England and Sex Pistols and all that stuff. And then Paul Simonon and all those guys took that on. And then by the time it came back over here, it was more about kind of something to kind of hate in a way, or like there was no middle ground for it. It wasn't like you could sit next to like the new Fleetwood Mac record and go, hey, it was like, wow,
Yeah. It'd be like,
yeah.
Well, yeah, it was the exact opposite. You know what I mean? But wow, that's yeah. So you guys, at this point, the scene's developed. You're playing out. You meet Gary, who's playing with these younger cats, and Gary, because like, at that point, he ran from home, correct, with his girlfriend.
Yes. He didn't. Again, what would happen is, he lived around the corner from where Theron lived, so they just started practicing at Gary's place because he was kind of setting up a studio. His brother was a really famous, he was, and later he won a Grammy and all this kind of stuff. And then those guys, just to let it be known, his name was Rory. They were trying to bounce off of that whole thing. I don't really know exactly, but let's just call it like sort of post Miles Davis, post Mahavishnu, that just really kind of stuff, and so they were about that, but also the introduction of these kind of new instruments, because the other thing that doesn't get pointed out a lot too is that in 75, keyboards and everything went from just being like the Farfisa and the Hammond organ and piano to 75,000 different kind of, these kind of synthesizers. I don't know if you can see this right here, but all these synthesizer things. So there was the Moog X1, all this kind of stuff. And his brother was just, all that Rick Wakeman kind of stuff. And so it was like kind of technology versus minimalism in the two worlds, and so Gary had his foot in both camps, not that Gary could play keyboards at that style or anything, but but he did try to play drums like Bill Bruford and all these kind of things, but but he wouldn't slip that into the Fall of Christianity stuff because they were keeping it. I mean, there was a lot of rules about punk rock at that time. If you're going to do that kind of thing, you had to but you had to be kind of uniform and snarl at people and have all of that. It worked way out of it a couple of years later and became all. But yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. Then you had like the Minutemen. You got stuff that was a little more expansive. Yes. I think with the punk approach and
that's Minutemen is a very good example of how when that hit, it opened up a lot of stuff. That's very good.
Yeah, they're one of my favorites. And those guys, they're doing some of these punk things with sharp 9 chords, and you're like, what?
Yeah,
this is so.
They covered Dr. Wu by
yeah, right. And
right.
They loved Blue Oyster Cult, know.
Sure who was kind of proto-punk. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I do know that, and Patti Smith's book.
Right. I was going to say that. Yeah.
Long Island.
Yeah, man. No, they were kind of on the being that, there's probably an alternative timeline where Patti Smith was in Blue Oyster Cult, and they had a totally.
Yeah, she wrote a couple of, I can't remember. Oh God, I can't
some
remember.
Of the early tunes, yeah.
Yeah.
God, I can't. I just went down this rabbit hole. It'll come back to me. It'll come back to me 10 minutes later, and I'll be like, "Duh." But okay, so Gary's playing, and and what's initially when you meet Gary? What's kind of the first reaction? You know what I mean? What's kind of was it did you guys click right away?
It was again because style feeds content. He was just a guy that they were going to use temporarily because he was this old hippie, as it was called, and but he could play so well, and he had these guys were young. They're I think let me see, I was 19, so I was 20, so they would have been, Brian and Theron would have been 17 or 18, maybe 21, right in there, and he was 27 or 26. He had a job, he had his own apartment, he had his own car. He was this just high level weed dealer, just to keep it real, And so there was a lot of that going on too, and he had a great record collection, which those guys didn't care about, but I did. I really liked looking. He had. Man, looking back on it, it's amazing. He had the United States of America. He had Silver Apples. He had a lot of stuff, and and the Fugs and all of these kind of, and and then, but we in turn were turning them on to the punk rock stuff, and then me, who I was, since I was older than these guys too, I was kind of a early Simple Minds and Peter Gabriel, and going back, I was into Genesis and Van der Graaf Generator and these kind of things, this kind of kind of thorny progressive rock stuff, and King Crimson and all that, and he didn't know that Bill Bruford was in King Crimson, so I was, anyway.
Yeah.
So that's,
but that's one of those things.
I'll keep that on this podcast, but it was, yeah.
You tell them that, and then you get a homie, you get a friend that's like, what? I didn't know that. And you get, because, from the documentary, I know he was super into Yes and some of the, the prog rock groups like that, Gary, that is. And when you get that click with somebody, you're like, oh, you're as into this as I am. You know what I mean? Then is that, so with that, is that where you guys, you and Gary developed a friendship?
Yeah, that's how Krell came out of that later.
Okay.
Yeah. So by the time, this time, because he got kicked out of the Fall of Christianity, because they were doing really good and playing in Sacramento a lot at that punk scene that was happening. But he, as Gary is wont to do, he demanded more of a business plan, and he did money for, again, it was not a money making enterprise, But, so then after that, I just kept hanging around with him because he had his own studio and stuff, and he had a reel to reel and the other thing about that kind of stuff too is that technology was happening so fast that it was that very first wave of where you could make your own music. That was really unusual. That was like extremely exciting, you know. So so we would go over there and put on his reel to reel and then flip it over, and we did like I remember this like about 82. I remember we recorded an XTC song. I remember that. And anyway, it was really fun. And then so after that, Krell happened. And so this isn't pointed out in the movie, but I always make a point of pointing this out in the podcast, is that Krell, Crll, which before had been called terminal boredom, and it was like an apocalyptic, wipe out everything kind of. There were the punk bands that were around, but they had their song structures and stuff. But our sing, our singer would set up the whole stage with like armchairs and cigarette holders and stuff, like kind of like Martin Mull did back in the day. But they had songs called Baby Ba-. I mean, man, he was apocalyptic. Ed Dahl was. And they would take baseball, like babies, and disassemble them and hit them with baseball bats. And they had a song about using kids for bases in their baseball. Just all of it. That song that's on that thing called No Sex is just one example. We had all kinds of Red-Eyed Monkeys on the beach, just all kinds of Vampire Nuns on Freebase. I'm telling you, man. And sadly, not now because times have changed, but we were just hated by the punk rock guys because we were not like them. We had 7 guys in our band, and we'd be just doing these full on like sheets of metal, Sonic Youth kind of things, and then break into these like 7/8 kind of progressive rock breaks, and it was like not loved. And we were used as the example of what not to do, and we didn't care.
Which is more punk in that sense, you know what I mean? Like that's
yeah, it's like it was. There was a lot of rules. Once again, there was a lot of rules about that kind of stuff. But all this time later, everybody's all in love with each other, and we all love each other, and everybody appreciates it. But what I was going to say about Krell was that which Terminal Boredom became Krell, and I joined them because I saw them play live, open for the Dead Kennedys, and I go, I'm in your band, and so I joined them as a bass player, and I go, hey, I know this guy that we can practice at his house, and he can be our drummer, and he used to be that band, in Fall of Christianity. And they go, oh, Gary, yeah, let's do it. So we did that. And then, so what I wanted to say to it that's not in the movie is that Gary was the organized guy, which doesn't come across in that movie, but he was the guy that we had strict practice 3 times a week, and he was very like, come on, guys, get it together, because all we wanted to do is just like, just party all the time and be crazy and do all these weird things. But he kept us really on track about it, because we had 2 bass players, a guitar player, a keyboard player, Ed Dahl, who played like bass clarinet and sang songs like Vampire Nuns on Freebase and all this kind of stuff. And our songs were hard, and they were real fascinating. Like, when you like jump over to like the English bands at the time, like This Heat and that kind of stuff. I mean, you could tell that those guys came from a lot of training, but they were hitting it so fast, and we were kind of trying to be that stuff. And Gary, we were banned for 3 years, I think. And I really developed as a musician being in that band, but secretly, not secretly, we were in the punk world, but secretly we were developing our chops and our songwriting things, because Gary was pretty insistent on it, and I ended up quitting and going to the Torn Boys, which you might know about.
Right.
I don't know if you know it.
Yep. No, that was one. I was going to bring that up at one point. But okay, so did you meet those cats around, just playing in other gigs with Krill, or like?
I met, again, it was artists. These guys were
Right.
artists. You know what I'm saying? Just
like
Ed
visual.
Dahl.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ed Dahl is pretty famous. Ed Dahl has a song on that record, but Ed Dahl later went on to become like this real. He was like an art teacher at the School of Design, the Fashion School of Design. He's a professor. Anyway, that's really weird because all of these we were just wasted, and but ambitious and each one of those guys went on. David Hildebrand went on to become a publisher. Paul Gadosi was the first guitar player in the Torn Boys. Sadly, he died. But Pat Saunders, who was our other, it was two bass players. It was our other, is a founding member of Dolby. He's one of the original, he's got like that, he's like a, whatever you call it, an original stockholder guy. It's incredible. But you wouldn't have known it at the time because you were like, hey, what's up? But what we would do before our practices is, it sounds kind of corny now, but at the time it was pretty exciting. But that album Discipline, I don't know if you know it, by King Crimson, came out, the first, second wave, like in 1980, came out. And so we would listen to that before we would go into practice, but we would also listen to really good, the Buzzcocks and Clock Deviate, and all these weird, early Simple Minds, which was different than like we would listen to like Reel to Reel Cacophony and early Ultravox. And when I say those names now, people think of like, oh, Vienna or something like that. But I'm talking about like not yet developed early English bands like the Human League, where they were just these weird guys just banging on stuff and doing, being boiled, and we were listening to that kind of stuff and then going and practice,
Well, I think,
and
yeah,
Perubu.
Yeah, a Perubu, or even like what would come later with the no wave stuff. It's and like Sonic Youth and like
that was at the same time. At the same time.
Okay.
The no wave stuff was in, and then Sonic Youth was a little bit just a couple of years later for me, in my mind. Yeah. Teenage Jesus and the Jerks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
man.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that, but like it's I think that's like an important note that definitely it's a bummer it didn't make it to the documentary, but like if someone like Gary who starts his own studio, is playing with all these different groups, like there is a lot of discipline to make that happen, even though he's a wild character, and to his, like, which is part of who he is, but like discipline to make any of this work, it's like kind of like the knowing when to control the chaos type of thing. And like after kind of being in a band with Gary, and like he's making sure you all practice and stuff, did you find yourself taking that discipline, like at least influence later into your other career, like other gigs and such, like going into the
well, the next thing that I did was in between that there was this little thing, again, because electronic stuff was becoming so cheap. There was this friend of mine in Lodi who was later in the Torn Boys named Duncan Atkinson, and he got this thing called a Pro One, which you might know, a Roland Pro One bass synthesizer thing, and then an early thing called early drum machine called a Dramatics that had all these presets and stuff you could do. So me and Ed Dahl from Krill and Duncan started this little thing that was called Dada 96, and it was just this little trio, and we just recorded on cassettes. And then Jeff Clark heard that, my friend Jeff, and he was back from school, and he said, hey, we should try something like that. And so that became the Torn Boys. And then the Torn Boys had Jeff was on a real writing jag. He was very very prolific. And so the practices that we would have would be sort of he and I shoving like Simon and Garfunkel type harmonies on top of like Joy Division, noise, and that became the Torn Boys. And then Grant Lee Phillips joined as a little boy. He was like 17, I think. And so we had a good little jaunt there. Then they moved to LA and became Shiva Burlesque. But during that time, we practiced all the time because it was fun. It wasn't a grind. Also, it was like an art project. We would this other thing that we did, which we felt like we invented it, but I'm sure it's been going on for a long time. But we invented this. We felt like Jeff and I invented this thing that was called 1-minute songs, so that we could bust out of looking at the blank sheet of paper and going, once upon a time, So we would tear up pieces of paper, write song titles on it, switch, go into the other room and go, see you in 4 minutes, and come back, and you have to have a fully written out song. And then you just press the Panasonic little tape recorder with little shake of the guitar and go, pink and blue, what I'm going, and we would make it had to be done. There's like no thinking, oh, stop, we got to do it again. That didn't work. And so and Jeff and I were getting really good at that. So by the time that Grant joined, we were hot on that, and we were doing that quite a bit. And so the practices were more like kind of art experiments and art parties in a way, and then it just kind of, and then the other thing I'd like to point out is that Stockton wasn't, even though it's this kind of like enclave in California, that's, the capital city's here, so that kind of overshadows all of it. But we were like, I always try to call it a pirate town, and it's racially diverse and all kinds, and it has a university. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on, but there wasn't stuff that was bubbling out of it. It was just about ready for Chris Isaak to come out of it, but really there wasn't much else that was going on, really. And so we were able to, get a lot done without having a lot of eyes on us. And so what would happen would be that we would do stuff that would, we'd be able to go to Davis, say, which was another town that had bands that came out of it, like the Suspects, which later became Dream Syndicate, and Game Theory, that great early 80s stuff. And we kind of attached ourselves to that and played and got on the radio station. So we were kind of bubbling up a little bit. And then those guys, when that stopped, those guys moved to LA, and I say my family was a construction family, and I was working for them. So I stayed in town and worked with my dad. And I joined this thing that was called Broken Toys, which was this band that was locally really huge band. And so that was a practice band. That band practiced a lot, and we really put a lot of time into molding ourselves into kind of psychedelic furs, Echo and the Bunnymen kind of sound, And also I was in school at that time, and I was a dance major. So all of that stuff was kind of happening, kind of Peter Murphy, Bauhaus, all kind of things. And MTV we were very visual. And one of the thing about that particular band, which I always try to bring up later, everybody in Broken Toys, including the woman, came from sports. So we had discipline. We knew how to practice. And we were really hard on each other. So, no, I want to watch the baseball game. No, we were like, it was very, we were like an army, and it was a great band. I just that Jeff doesn't like it when I point this out, but we were in the shadow of the genius of like Jeff Clark and Leslie Medford, who was in the Ophelias. These guys were my friends, and Jackson Griffith, and these guys were. It's like hanging out with Shakespeare, and you're going, I want to write too. It was just intuitive. And it was just, and those guys all made it, in their respective things. Like Shiva Burlesque came out, and they were in like the, Rolling Stones top 100 albums of the year. Then the Ophelias had Mr. Rabbit and became this huge. And they were signed to Rough Trade. And my friend Jackson Griffith went on to write for Pulse magazine and became this really super famous writer. And then there was little Kelly with his band, just kind of thing. And so all these years later, we're a lot more appreciated because that sound has come back around again. But it was intimidating.
Of course, like
Thank you for listening. Yeah, it's like,
yeah, but everyone's like, I don't know. We grow when the people around us are growing. So if those are your friends, those are the people you
yeah,
want to be hanging out with, man. And like,
yeah,
I don't know. I think in everyone's mind, we're not doing as much as somebody else, but other people looking in are like, oh my God, you're killing it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. And locally we were like really huge, And to this day, I mean, that band Broken Toys, we're making another record right now, and
yeah,
everybody's all together. It's,
nice.
yeah, everybody's in good health and all of this kind of stuff. But anyway, that.
Well, when's Broken Toys' new record gonna drop? When's that like?
I'm just like I'm sitting in the studio right now because again, these guys, they're so physically fit and have the sports discipline and stuff that they just handed me over 5 basic tracks that were done and go, okay, Kelly, write all the words. And I'm like, and that's something that's really interesting. I know you can relate this because of what you're telling me your job is and what you do. When I was young, I didn't care about, I would just write stuff because that's what we did, you just, but now I have all this knowledge later about music and greatness and everything like that. And you kind of slow down, your metabolism slows down, and it's harder to get stuff that doesn't seem derivative or is working. And I could fill this entire room up with all of the pieces of binder paper that I've been working on those new songs. And I'm going, it's not good enough. And people go, oh, you're just being too hard on yourself. But I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I know like what doesn't work,
Yeah. Well, so going back from those minute songs, those 4-minute song exercises,
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, do you find yourself kind of doing that, but
That's how I do it.
Yeah. So like, okay,
Yeah.
with this new, Broken Toys, like, you get these tracks and like, are you going to like sit down, drum up a melody, give yourself like 5 minutes, write something, then keep going on? What's it look like now? Like, what's the mature version of that exercise?
Wow. Thank you for asking. I hear people say this all the time, and I'm about to say this. That's a great question. I try it every way. Because I work with for one. Okay, so I'm 66 years old, but I'm here in this town to where people have respect for me because every generation I've been in something and they go, "That's that guy," right? So there's these younger guys here that just have the time to work with me because they want to help me out, but they're 30 years younger than me, and they'll just sit over in that chair right there and just go, "You want to try it again?" They just because they think I can do it, and I really respect that, but I don't want to take up people's time. So that's the first part of it. But what I would say is that I do it every way. First, I'll just go turn it on, and I'll almost do it like phonetically with vowels, just just to get that out. That's one way. And then I'll put down this piece of paper that is part William Burroughs and part a commercial from Life cereal, and just stick it all together. I'll do that. Yeah, for real. I'm serious about that.
That's
part,
awesome.
like an advertisement that's from this magazine that I tore out of, like the New Republic or something, and just jam all those words together. And then I'll do something that's very beautifully done in handwriting, and it's all written out just right. And then I'll try to do it. I go, okay, turn it on. Now I'm going to sing it like Bruce Springsteen. Now turn it on, and now I'm going to sing it like, Nick Cave. Now turn it on. Now I'm going to sing in my version of what I think is Japanese, and do all of that stuff. Really, for real. I mean, it sounds like I'm being silly, but that's how I do it.
No, that doesn't, like, to me that sounds like you're playing. You know what I mean? You're trying to, like, I think that's an amazing way to do it because you're not setting the bar of like that's wrong. You know what I mean? Like, you're opening it up to all these different variabilities to, like, any one of these things could be the thing that works.
And then the other kind of cheating thing that I do, that if my band from Broken Toys sees this, they're going to go, Kelly, is that every once in a while I'll get something I think is really what, and I'll send it to kind of my teacher, Jeff, I go, is this okay? And he'll write back and he'll go, don't use that word right there. Don't use that word. And I go, I thought so too, kind of stuff,
I don't think that's
So
cheap. I think that's it's your friends. You know what I mean? You're like, as a resource here, like, you're like, oh, does this make sense? Proofread. You know what I mean? It's part of
yeah,
writing in general. Like,
but just to go back to what we were talking about earlier is that um, Jeff doesn't want me to be in his shadow. You know, he doesn't think I am, but I'll always be that. You can't shake that. You know, I mean, I suppose people can, but um, when I was 15, he wrote just sitting there. He just wow, and he just listen to this, and he wrote this whole song called "Smoke a Little Thunder," which I can still remember every word of it. It's just unbelievable. I go, how did you do that? And he can still do it. It's just some people just have that facility. Now, the other thing, again, there's a young scene that's around here. So there was just this thing just last night in this just downstairs in this music store that I'm at here, totally sold out with all these people that I'm 30 years older than and stuff. And there was these cool bands that played, and there was this kind of hip hop band that was the last one, and they just kind of at the last song just opened up the floor, and I kind of just walked up and I rapped,
yeah,
and
dude, that's awesome.
but I'm actually a fan of that, and I'm pretty good at it. And so for a guy that's like me,
Yeah.
I can kind of for two reasons: because I really enjoy hip hop and I'm not ironic about it, and the other thing about it is that I come from Bakersfield, so when I was young, I sat and saw auctioneers. I want to get home $5, and so that's rap, man. And I saw Commander Cody, and
Yeah,
I
man,
like
Commander Cody, dude.
and I'm Irish, and so that's the world of James Joyce, all this kind of stuff like that. We're language people, so I forgot why I brought that up. I think I'm just bragging that I rapped.
That's all right. This
It was
is
cool. And the kids dug it, man. Go look at Grandpa go, kind of thing. It was cool. It was very cool. And so I'm just saying, um, maybe facility fades, or if you don't use it or whatever. But for me, hip hop, that kind of having vowels pouring out of me in 16th notes and stuff it really helps me, and it keeps my tongue and my throat and everything. I'm talking to you like I'm in your class. Look what I did,
That's
But
awesome.
one of the things that you might be interested in is that when I came out of school, I came out of recreational. I got this is after Broken Toys, and in the 90s, I went into recreational therapy, and so I went and worked in mental health. Right, so I was in dance therapy and music therapy and art therapy and all this kind of stuff. And later, it went on to be into diagnostic, just the whole larger thing of it, with like people that were coming out of prison. I was in it for 20 years, and but I also worked in the with kind of an autism thing that was for a couple of years too, and it was this was like in a school for like 2 years, and so I know what you're talking. I know the world you're talking about, and it's the genius that can come out of that, where there's no filter from it. It's such an influence on me, just looking back and thinking about some young woman or something, or just how people could um, talk about their family or their with no filter and say it in such a poetic way because they're not self-conscious. I know, I know,
Yeah. No,
and
I know what you mean. Yeah, like they're
yeah,
not like the social cue that may be not a nice thing to say about somebody. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's gone, but
yes,
or not gone, just not acknowledged. And like, but in a way, like kind of going back to this whole topic that we're on, like the idea of writing, just going at something for 4 minutes, giving it
yeah,
what it can be. Like there's a certain like, and I think maybe it sounds like it's like an ebb and flow of like, that freedom to say whatever and do whatever, and then
yeah,
fine tune it, is like what it seems like to be now, especially with when you're like kind of putting all these outside, like perspectives. Oh, someone's going to analyze or ask me about this or think about that, or like, you know what I mean? Like, so that like it makes sense how that process would kind of slow down after a bit, going back to what you said before, but it's not necessarily, it sounds like that process is slowing down. More so it's just like the attentive, like the refining of what actually goes when you say you're done. Like it, I mean, to the initial 4-minute thing, like, here it is, we wrote it, it's done. See you tomorrow. Which I think that's man, I'm like, when you mentioned that, I'm like, that's going to be part of my new routine, is just trying to pull one of those out every once in a while,
Awesome. It really helps.
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah. So, but it makes sense that you would build off that. That, to me, that would be like the next like mature level of the exercise, would be like, put on the timer. Now I got 3 verses, and if I put that together, but that one can go with that thing over there. You know what I mean? Like that's really cool.
Yeah, because it's like the from the heart through the brains to the hands or to the voice, instead of sort of having these, almost like gatekeepers or people holding a velvet rope on you. It's not even people. It's the people that you have in your head that's stopping you from doing that. And I'm suffering from that lately, but it's, but I've been, I have all these tracks I'm saying for Broken Toys, and I tell them, keep that one, so they're stacked up. There's like 6 different versions for each one, and I could go back and listen to them, and maybe it'll inspire me at a different day, kind of thing. But I do get the feeling there's kind of a deadline coming up, because we're going to be playing shows, and so it's going to help us to have a new record, and I'm the one who's holding it up. So that pressure is exciting too. That, I got to do it. So these guys, so I don't let my band down.
Well, that's that's like homework's due. Eventually, you got to turn it in. Like.
Did you hear the Broken Toys? I'm busted. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, but I mean,
but
like,
Gary, with Gary, right?
Oh yeah.
So when it came to Gary, let's jump ahead. He got this, after Pavement, he got this record contract, right? So, man, Gary Young has a record contract, and he asked me and my friend Zach, because we worked in mental health and we were doing, we were doing all of this art and music therapy stuff. We were the guys that were good to work with him. And then there was this other guy, the main guy, who was named Eric Westfall, and he was this really brilliant musician that worked right with Gary, and they, made Plant Man and all this kind of stuff. Gary had to whip it out, man, and get some stuff done. And he got out that pen, and he had, I'm actually in the room where we have a bunch of his lyrics that were left over, and all these, at the time when it was happening, we were like, let's just get over it and stuff like that. But now that Gary's gone, and we're able to look at stuff in a museum kind of way and stuff, I'll pick up one of those pieces of paper, and it's just his story and what he was going through, and beautifully written. He was really well read, and just a super smart guy, but doesn't get treated that way a lot, because he was the, boho, the boho cabbage passing out drunk guy, I didn't really know him that way, because here's the other thing about it too. I always find this interesting. At my age, and all my other friends kind of went through this too, I grew up so much around alcohol, because that was the drug. Mad Men, the kind of shows show you what it was like, the 3 alcohol lunches and stuff, that wasn't that unusual to me, that somebody was like wasted all the time. It just wasn't. But to those Pavement guys, they were younger, and in that movie, they say, I never knew anybody that was an alcoholic. And when I was surprised. I was going, I didn't really know any adult that wasn't. Unless they went to church. It's really strange how times have changed, and it's good.
Just seeing it, because there's the kind of like stereotypical alcoholic who's like, vulgar and like, hurting people and totally, like, but there's also, I think, a large majority of people who are suffering with, alcoholism that mostly
Yes.
only hurt themselves. You know what I mean? Like, and like, you may never know, you may just be like, oh, they're goofy if you don't encounter them every day. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you're not there when, they wake up and go to bed, you might not see, they're not just like a, goofy guy, or I don't know, or like,
That's very
quiet.
well said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Functioning alcoholics, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, I found that interesting too, because they were both. So we're kind of going back to touch upon the Pavement thing. You
Mhm.
introduced those cats to Gary,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So, and that was via the record store, or were they playing
Yeah.
in bands in the
So
scene?
so what happened was, again, I was in Broken Toys, and we had made a record, and that was an unusual thing uh, at this time to actually make a vinyl record. But Broken Toys was making so much cash that we were able to afford to make it. Da, da, da. And so, I was working in a record store with Scott at that time, and I went and saw him and Steve, and they were just called Scott and Steve. And they played at this place called the Blackwater, which is a really beautiful institutional place for the history of music in Stockton. And there was this open mic night, and Jeff and I were both there too. And they went up and they did 3 songs, and one of them was a Leonard Cohen song. I think one of them was probably it was a couple of songs that were off their first Slay tracks. And I was just, whoa, And so the next day, I went in and talked to Scott, and I was going, man, anything I can do to help you out, let me know. You don't stop. Whatever you guys are doing, please don't. And he said to me, can you book us into that studio where Broken Toys made your record? And as I said, we were like this Peter Gabriel 48-track Dolby noise reduction kind of big thing. And I was going, you don't want to be there. I go, they would have zero understanding of what you guys would sound like. So no, I will not do that. But I know a guy. And I go, wait right here. And so I went in the back and used the phone, and I called up Gary. And I said, hey, I'm going to bring in these kids. And I've told this story a lot, but it was like this. And I said, you're not gonna really understand, because these guys were beyond punk rock. They were Pavement, and I go, it's not going to be to your taste, but they got the money, man. These are college kids. They got the cash, and so just let them come in and do it. And I got you, because he said, hey, Foley, you got to get me some people to come in here. And he was expecting people that would be, like Foreigner type of bands or something. And so, and then you saw how it went. They went in there and they were burning the chicken in the fire with all the puppets.
The puppet thing's awesome.
Possibly be. It's super accurate. That's exactly how it was. And I always like to tell this story. Whenever anybody would go in, a new person would go into Gary's place, because his older brother told him this, he would always play, oh God, I can't remember. I think it's called Back in the High Life. It was this Stevie Winwood album, it was this album, and it won the Grammy, and it was all perfectly made. And so he would go, this is what a record would sound like. And he would put on that record and play it for him, right? Whoever would come in, and they go, yeah, okay, can we go record now? And so I asked him on the phone, please do not play that Stevie Wonder. Please do not. It's just will mean nothing. Don't do it. Don't do it.
These guys won't care.
And then when I saw him a couple of days later, I go, Scott, did he? He goes, yeah, he played. I go, God. It was really fun recording with him. I mean, he played drums. I go, he played drums with you guys? He go, yeah. And man, I did. The reason why I wanted to help them out is because I just wanted to have a recording of those guys. Hi, little kitty. I see a cat behind you. I want to have a recording of these great songs that these guys, just for my own. This is back when you could have a cassette of your friends. That's all. I didn't think it would get any further. I really didn't. So I'm going on record as like, I wasn't the visionary. It was just going to be for me and Jeff, because we really liked him, and our tastes were kind of so outside that we didn't think anybody else would like it. But the future always slaps you in the face, man.
Yeah,
In
that's
a good
incredible.
way,
Yeah.
in a great way, Yeah.
That's so funny that
Thank you
yeah.
for letting me tell that. Thank you for letting me tell that story.
Oh, thank you for sharing it, man. That's incredible. So okay, so anyway, so then skip ahead and now Gary's hospital, and now you've all had some like kind of therapeutic approaches to your work, in your life, and you guys are working on this on Gary's hospital record, and like,
Yeah.
and that's so like. Does Gary just like reach out to you, or how does that project even
Yes.
come? Yeah, so he reaches out to you guys.
I got a call. Yeah. And, I'd been following Pavement and it was really great. I mean, it was so fun to see my friend, and he'd been on. Jeff tells a story about how he was in England one time and he's walking down the street and he sees like an enemy and he goes, "That guy looks like Gary." And he goes, "That's Gary Young." Anyway, and so Pavement really blows up and then he quits the band. And then, but still, Big Cat Records reach out to him and say, "We'd like to offer you, would you make a record, make a couple of songs or something?" Actually, I think they had made Plant Man and sent it to Big Cat, who was kind of associated with you. And so they needed a band because they were going to make a record. So they called it me and Zach. And as I said, Zach and I had worked in music therapy and so we worked in the psychiatric health facility for a couple of years with people that were on like 72-hour locks up. It was high-level schizophrenia stuff. And we applied that 1-minute song. So I introduced it to Zach. I go, "Look what we can do instead of just sitting there and singing, Creedence Clearwater songs and Eagle songs. Let's put these people to work on their own stuff." And then just to go a little bit to the side of that, the psych techs and stuff didn't really like that because they thought that it was just giving too much freedom to these people that should be really following the rules. But the psychiatrists themselves, there were 4 main ones, just said, "Stay out of their way and let these guys do whatever they want because we're getting stuff that they would never say to us."
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the end of all these sessions, we would just hand these cassette tapes and go, "Here,"
Yeah.
and
That's
listen
incredible.
to them. It really helped.
Yeah.
It really did.
It's one of those things. It's taking trauma and putting it into your own power. How do you want to say it, or whatever it may be. It's like the bar is fun. You know what I mean? The bar that we are now setting is we are having fun, and we can be like deep and like serious about it, but also it's like this is way more fun than sitting in the chair talking. So that's cool. I'm really happy to hear you got that experience. That's really,
and
really
they even took the session that we did, which we did twice a week, and we did it for like 2 years. They changed the name of it from Sing Along to MDERP, which meant Misdirected Energies Records Presents, and they called it that. And I mean, it was it was in the curriculum, like typed it, like, yeah, dude, we did it. But I'm telling you, the people that were immediately above us, just like, "Oh, you guys again?" Yeah. Anyway, me and Zach,
for sure.
we were at like Fear and Universal Congress and all kinds of weirdo bands.
Yeah.
Captain Beefheart and stuff, and we would approach it like that.
Well, because when you approach it, and music can be anything. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
And like
it's gonna sound like that.
It's gonna sound like that, but also, it's welcoming, and it can. The more you learn about the rules, the more you break them because they exist musically, creatively. And
wow. That's well said.
And maybe that's why those cats didn't. They're like, "Man, I'm trying to keep these guys in line all day. When you guys come in, they have a hoot and hollering time.
Yeah,
they think they can just do whatever." Like.
That's exactly what they would say. But the psychiatrist, the top guys would say,
Oh yeah, because they knew this
not
was
do
beneficial.
not hinder these guys. They are giving us what we need.
Yeah.
It was great. I was really proud of that. But so then to jump to Gary, he knew about that because I would go over there and play him those tapes and stuff and go, I'm not supposed to say that, but we kind of bootleg some of this stuff out. And so by the time that it came to when he was doing that, he said to Eric, "We got to get Foley and Zach," and so we came there and we were the band. And Zach had to jump and become a teacher because he had a family and stuff. So we ended up getting these two other guys, and then that was like a real kind of powerhouse traveling band. And we played with the Dirty Three and Sonic Youth and Pavement and so many bands. Seba, we went on tour with Sebado. We played with the Flaming Lips, Brian Jonestown's Massacre, Kim Gordon. I just kept going on and on and on.
So, yeah.
It was really fun.
Well, I mean, and Sonic Youth was, or no, Thurston was in a Gary's Plant Man video, great. Man. That's sick.
We used to hang out with those guys all the time.
Yeah.
And that was fun too. To me, this is another interesting thing. So we're talking 94 to like 93 to 96, let's call it that, as when we were functioning. And we would be with those guys, and Gary and I would sort of be made fun of by some of those guys, even though they liked us and they were nice to us, but because we liked progressive rock. And we wouldn't put it in their face or anything, but it was known that Gary liked Yes and I liked, and that kind of stuff. But now when I listen to Kim Gordon, right, who has a new record out, I've 3 separate interviews with her, and every time she makes a point of, well, I really like prog. And I was going, in my mind, you didn't then.
Yeah. Well, sorry. It's just so funny because that kind of goes back to the T-shirt thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think, you know what I mean? Like, it's whatever the crew, maybe it's whatever socially is acceptable to be cool. You wear or you're not. Like, because, like, it would only make sense that if you liked prog, you would like the opposite of prog. You know what I mean? For as much attention to like detail and time and structure and like challenge, or difficulty of whatever piece is, you would find the same amount of freeness knowing that all those options that could be there, you chose not to. You know what I mean? It's like if we look at John Coltrane, for example, his career is tight, and then it just gets all over the map, and becomes a whole spiritual thing. So like, it makes sense that like.
Wow, that's very interesting. I just went and saw his son, Ravi Coltrane, and they did this. He had this full band, and he had a woman harp player like his mom, Alice Coltrane. And it was all that stuff you're saying was all built into the entire show. And there's stuff that was just so tight and so perfectly jazzed, and then just complete freedom of expression that it was so beautiful. And it encompassed all those things that we've talked about.
I've just recently learned about, his son. I didn't know anything about his son's. I've been a huge Coltrane fan, and like didn't think to even, you know what I mean? Like, and just like this year, I was like, oh my God, you know what I mean? That's incredible. But yeah, like, so that kind of makes sense. And like, on a side tangent, Thurston apparently is a big fan of, Kent Taylor. Oh, yeah,
Albert Eiler and all that stuff. Yeah,
Cecil Levy. So the guy we started talking about.
Oh,
like he's like
really?
He's like an avid collector of like of his poetry and just like some of the Cleveland poets. Which
oh my God, that makes sense because he, we were on that tour. We were in Lollapalooza. I'm sorry, I didn't point that out. Ginsberg was at one of those things, and he was, being Allen Ginsberg, which I really, but it can really get on people's nerves because they don't if they don't, they're not, you know what I'm saying? And some of those guys, some of the people that were on the tour were like, what is this, and he would say, that's Allen Ginsberg, someday you'll know, kind of thing. It was really cool to see him stand up, or it was really beautiful.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something Kent was telling me earlier, that he met Thurston or something, like, and I was like, no way, that's so cool. But anyway, so aside from the prog teasing everyone on those tours, it sounds like an amazing experience.
Oh, it was fun. Yeah. And the prog teasing was well worth it, because Van de Graaff generator, I don't know. It's like, if you listen to, there's some stuff that is from that is so face meltingly, punk rock from 1971 that you can't believe it, for instance, that kind of, and so it's okay, and the other thing about it too is that, having been a person that had to suffer through, not suffer, but in order, when I was younger, during that time, all those bands I was talking about, I didn't tell you, like when I was in Krell and Torn Boys, and all that, in between all that stuff, I had to make money to live too. So I was like because I had this high voice, I had to be a singer, like in these like bands that did Judas Priest and Zeppelin and stuff like that, because I could sing that stuff. And that's where I really got beat up about, there's like very narrow-minded approaches to, etc. I don't want to go off on those guys too hard, but
right. But I get what you're saying. So, like,
when I'm hanging out with like say Beck and those kind of guys, and we could talk for hours about, Peter Bogdanovich movies that were, or something. It just, these people were literate and smart and cool, and Warhol, and
right. Well, like,
not only about Iron Maiden. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, I feel both those like skill sets are so like important too. Like, because to be able to, yes, you can sing that gig, but how often, if you're going to work all those type of gigs, playing probably like 4 hours, you know what I'm saying, of like work, you know what I mean? That's going to kick your ass. So to be able to balance that and the original stuff, it's like such a, going back to discipline, it's such a learned discipline to be able to do that.
Well, I still do it now. Do it now in order, because to play in these bands, like the Torn Boys recently played, and like David J. from Bauhaus played bass with it.
That's sick. Yeah.
Good life,
what?
man.
I just saw that. I saw that online. Yeah. Oh, fuck, I forgot all about that. I should have started by asking about that. Shit.
But I'm just saying, we don't get to do that all the time. So I have to keep my voice in shape because I'm at this age. So I'm in all these other bands that are, screaming out hard rock Nazareth and stuff, and I can still do it because I keep doing it, And so I'm thankful that I've got that talent to be able to do that, but I practice classical stuff, and, when I say classical, I don't mean that I'm an opera singer, but I practice the vocal techniques that you do with the piano, all that kind of stuff, to keep my voice in shape, and I'll balance it between the two things about, doing some just real sloppy kind of post-punk kind of stuff, and then the Torn Boys kind of stuff, or I'll sing, Nazareth, Hair of the Dog, but I sing folk music too, and all kinds of different things. Funk, I was in 2 funk bands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Like, what's like as far as like a vocal health routine? Like, because I've recently, like, I do gigs all through the week, and like this week's been just a rough week. I got some type of bug or something, and I sound hoarse now. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's just as far as like vocal care, and because
your voice sounds high, so you're a tenor.
Tenor baritone area. Like,
yeah,
I don't like probably leaning more into the tenor, but
me too. I'm like in that realm. So what I do is I just jump on those YouTube things that that go on the piano and they make it.
Oh yeah, lip rolls. I've been living on lip rolls.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do it. But the other thing too, and this has been something that I kind of stumbled into because I got hired as like a ghost singer or a stunt singer for this theater troupe that was doing these plays, and they had these actors, but that were musicals, but they needed some people to sing backstage that could cover the high notes. So I became one of those, and then some people dropped out of the cast, so I ended up being in the cast, and I just all of a sudden was in theater, and I'm just staying with it. I really like it. It's really good. So that's what I was saying to you, like, everything from West Side Story to Rocky Horror Picture Show, just all the kind of stuff, all these different kind of things. It's fun.
I feel like
trying to sing every day because I'm, if I don't, you could lose it really fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. I've always been like afraid to overdo it or do the thing wrong. Like I went to Cleveland State. I studied music therapy, which is what I got my degree in, and that's what how I got the job I have now. So like, yeah, like when you were bringing this up, I was like, man, this is like.
Yeah, but I didn't. I studied dance and came into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But music therapy is that's, man, all praise and respect if you did that.
Well, thanks, man. But anyway, so I'm like, I'm trying to figure out like a better, I do the warm ups pretty much every day, and like. But so that's been your technique is you warm up, sing every day. Like, is it like learn something new every day or is it just run through a thing?
Well, because also the other thing about it too is that just on my way over here to come here, this is sort of weird to talk about. It's not gonna be weird to you, but because of the nature of my voice, I sing women stuff. And also when I do my solo gigs, it's mostly like I do like 70% songs by women, and I don't change the gender, the lyrics, and I just don't have time to think that way. And so I do Joni Mitchell and Kate Bush and Joan Armatrading and Pink and Lynn Lovitch and just women. I'm singing women songs because that's where my voice is at, and I can keep it up there too, and it's good for that kind of stuff. So on the way over here, it was a half-hour ride. I sang the album "Hissing of Summer Lawns" by Joni Mitchell, and I was hitting it too. I was like going, "Oh man, today's a good day." But some days you can't do it, But when I go home today, I'm going to take a nap and then I'll get up and get on the piano and do that.
Run through the scales. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So that's
sorry for any punk rock people that are listening.
I don't think there's anything more punk rock than doing singing is such like analyzing yourself. It's such a self-knowledge gig. You know what I mean? You have to know what you can do, where you're at, how that feels like. And just like you said, today's a good day. I can do that. Not every day is a good day. I can't always do. You know what I mean? Like I think it's such a like punk rock. I think that's as punk as it can get because it's 100% yourself.
I believe that. I do. Yeah. Punk is a real thrown around term, and so it means all kinds of different things to all kinds of different people, including prison, which I found out working in that. I was like, whoa, watch out what you say about punk.
Yep. It's a different vibe. I did a thing with the juvenile detention center here in Cleveland.
Yes,
going through school. So yes, familiar. So I guess, man, Kelly, you've been so gracious with your time. Thank you so much, man. Before ending, how did hospital when did that kind of taper out, or did it just stop at one point?
Yeah, it's in that movie when Eric and Gary went to have a meeting with Big Cat about our second record. I guess the thing I didn't point out, when I was with Krell, Gary was very, we must practice all the time. But when he went through Pavement, he really did get kind of broken down by drugs and alcohol. So by the time that we got to hospital, he kept his image as being hard to handle and unmanageable and stuff. But again, it was easy for me because he wasn't the worst thing I'd ever worked with. I'd been with people that serial murderers, and so but it was, when he went to go have that meeting, he like fell asleep, it just, we lost. Yeah, we lost. Yeah. But we still made that record, and it never really came out in any way, but it was pretty good. And a lot of it is in that movie. And then after that, I went on to be uh, do a lot of other music stuff. And then I had this band called Toadstool Theater, which is this whole different thing, and we would record it at Gary's studio. And during that time, the last thing that Gary ever did, which has never been released, but he played drums with me on guitar, this guy named Kevin singing, and then a bass player and this like Moog synthesizer kind of guy, and it was called Blue Boy Cometh. And it's really good. And so that was the last sort of thing that Gary ever did, that was recording and him doing his stuff, and he was really good on it too. And by the way, he was sober during that time too, for a small area. So during that time when we did that, he was not all messed up. And so, and that was just right after he had done played a couple of shows during the Pavement reunion. He played with them like in Berkeley, and he played with them in Stockton. He came up and did like, Summer Babe and all that kind of stuff. But if I could say one other thing, I'd just like to do a shout out to the company that put out the Louder Than You Think record, Independent Products record, which is run by Bruce Leitcher and Jeff Clark. And Bruce Leitcher was in Savage Republic, and we have all kinds of great people on it. We have David J, and we have Community FK, and we're re-releasing stuff by like from Camper Van Beethoven. It's really beautiful, really beautiful. And the art is great. And if people are able to check out the band, the Torn Boys, we made 4 videos. I don't know if you saw these, but we made videos for 4 of our songs that are on the record, and they it has a lot of my art in it because I'm an artist, and it was directed by this really great filmmaker named David Grisolfi. And anyway, that's my plug.
I'd love.
I did a lot of plugging.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
You do, but you got a lot going on, man. So I'll make sure I'm going to put that at the top of this too. I did a chat with David J a few years ago when he did the Night Crickets record, the first one, which is such a good record. And like, he was like he was so cool. Like, he sent me a cut he did of a Peter Lofner tune, and Peter Lofner was. Yeah, he was the original
too.
Yep. Not too many people know that, man. So like,
but he also was like in the original Perubu, and he went to New York, and he had that beautiful solo record that he did just sit in bed with the acoustic guitar.
Yep.
He's man.
Oh yeah. No, it's beautiful music, but he also kind of had a tragic story like D.A. Levy in a way. But like, I was telling. What was it? Either way, I was like, I forget how it came up, but we were talking about it. I was like, oh man, David J's even cooler than I thought, and I thought he was pretty freaking cool. So how did, I guess before we wrap it, did David just come up like with the Torn Boys playing with, like, how did you guys like?
Yeah, what happened was, this is just a story I was told. He had, for that record he had called Songs from the Attic, I believe, Tracks from the Attic. It was a bunch of songs that he had written like before Bauhaus and during Bauhaus, and just leftover tunes. And he had them all on cassettes, and he was looking for a label to see if they could like help him, release them and master them and all that kind of stuff. And somebody that he knew said, you got to check out this label that's called IPR, Independent Records. And so he got together with them, and they signed him, and he started hanging out with Jeff Clark, and they just, Jeff would tell him stories about how he started, and then he would talk about how David J would talk about how he started wherever he was in, what was it, North, wherever they're from, where Bauhaus is from, the same place that Alan Morris from, and and he is that North? I'm sorry, I don't know where it's at. Northampton, I think it is. Anyway, so they were getting along really well and working out more stuff. And then Shiva Burlesque did some song. We're making some songs, and he said, "Can I play bass on them?" And so he did. So that was Jeff and Grant and this guy named Dana Gumbiner, who was in a band called Death Ray, and then David played with them on this recording track. And then we were going to have this show, which we did have down in LA at this place called Gold Diggers, and it was going to be a whole label show. And so Shiva Burlesque was going to play, and David J was going to play. And so David J just said, apparently he said, "Can I play bass with you guys for Shiva Burlesque?" And everybody goes, "Yeah." And then Jeff said, "Hey, we're also going to do this other band I was in called the Torn Boys. Is going to play too." And he goes, "Yeah, I'll play that too." In fact, what happened was he sent him couple of the songs. He goes, "We're going to be doing this too." And man, I thought this was great. He wrote back and he said, "This sounds like the Nas," which is, I'm a Todd freak. And he goes, "This sounds like early Nas and the Birds." And we were like, "Ah." And he goes, "I can't wait to play." And man, he's such a good bass player. And he plays, I feel so embarrassed that I didn't know this, but he only plays fretless bass. So I'm looking, I was standing next to him, which was, kind of didn't want to fanboy out. We were all trying not to go, "Hey man, we tried not to, but I did go, "That's a fretless bass." Anyway, it was cool. Yeah, he only plays fretless bass. He's so good, and he's such a cool guy. And we practiced. This is great. We practiced so that Gold Diggers place belonged to Ed Wood, the guy that did Plan 9 from Outer Space. So we were practicing in this back room where they literally filmed the little flying saucer thing for Plan 9 from Outer Space. Oh, and he's just standing around going, they filmed Plan 9 here. And he goes, "Billy Lugosi." Dude,
oh my God,
it was hard to keep a straight face.
It's like one of those like moments where like you do this for so long and just for those moments, like that's incredible.
Full circle, man.
Oh, yeah. That's so freaking sick.
And this will crack you up. So while we're doing that, because we were there for like a week and a half, staying in LA so we could practice, because all these bands had to practice and stuff. So had a lot of time on our hands to do all this stuff. And then on the like second to last day, right before we're getting ready to do our show, I get this message from Broken Toys, my band, said, "Hey, I know you're busy and stuff like that, but here's all these songs." And I'm like, "Well, we wrote all these songs and recorded them, and so here you go, Kelly. Hope you have a good show." And what is happening? Yeah,
it
was good.
But I mean, that's just like at that point, more good news. Like it's just
the trick is stay alive.
Yeah,
stay alive long enough and don't stop.
Yeah, well, I think perseverance will. It can only equal success. It's just
because I have friends that we all have friends that just whether it's like they don't like the way sports is going, or they don't like the way theater or art or music or something like that, they drop out. And I'm not making fun of them, but I'm just saying they don't want to hear it anymore. They don't want to hear any of the new stuff or anything. I'm not that guy, maybe in sport, but it's there's always going to be something. Man, these kids that played last night, I was crying. It's unbelievable. And they're like 27 years old, maybe, or 30 or something. And they just they got that spark, but they're in control and they can play really well, but it's all ahead of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Man, that's, it's like, it's interesting. Like, I just had this conversation with this guy, Kent, I mentioned before, that poet. And like, he was telling me that there was this guy that kind of like ran a magazine in Cleveland here. And like, his name was Russell Atkins and he was a poet. And like, this guy didn't get any like note until he was like 98 or something here in Cleveland, like to like where they wanted to publish his work, and he's calling Ken. He's like, I don't get, what but I think so much of that is just doing the thing you love because you love to do it. And like, no matter what's going to happen, if you love doing it, someone's going to care or take notice or whatever eventually, but that doesn't even matter if they don't, because you're doing it because that's what you want to do. And like,
the spark of life, it doesn't age. It doesn't age. How about that?
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Stopping, running camera there, man.
Yeah.
Kelly,
such a pleasure to meet you, man.
Likewise, man.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.